Some people walk into a room and the whole temperature changes, not because they are louder than everyone else or brighter or trying harder, but because something in them is genuinely warm. Something in them says without words that you are going to be okay. Dylan Dreyer was that kind of person. She was that kind of presence. And for millions of Americans who turned on the television each morning before the coffee had even finished brewing, she was the closest thing to a constant that daily life could offer. She had built something rare, not just a career, though the career was real and earned and impressive by any honest measure, but a life. A full, textured, genuinely joyful life. With a husband she loved and children she adored, and a purpose she had been quietly working toward since she was a little girl, watching storm clouds roll in over a New York sky and wondering what they meant. She had it, all of it, at the same time. And then the ground shifted beneath her in ways she never asked for and could not have prepared for. The word tragedy is one we use too easily sometimes. We attach it to inconveniences and disappointments and things that sting but eventually pass. But what Dylan Dreyer walked through, not once, not in a single difficult season, but across several years of layered and compounding pain, deserves the weight of that word. What she carried, often in plain sight of an audience of millions, was the kind of thing that reshapes a person from the inside. What exactly happened to her? What did it take from her, and what did she choose to do with that loss? And how does someone whose whole professional identity is built around warmth and steadiness find her footing when the ground underneath her own life stops being steady? That is the story. And it is worth every careful word it takes to tell it. To really understand what Dylan Dreyer went through, you have to first understand what she came from. Because the hardest losses are always the ones that threaten the things we built with our own hands, over years, through effort and love and the quiet daily choice to keep going. She grew up in Ronkonkoma, New York, in a household where weather was not background noise. It was something you watched and studied and respected. Her father had a deep and genuine fascination with meteorology, and somewhere in those childhood years that fascination transferred. Not through a lesson plan, not through any deliberate instruction. Just through proximity and conversation, and the simple magic of a parent sharing something they love with a child who is paying attention. Dylan grew up looking at the sky the way other kids looked at television, as something alive, something worth understanding. She took that curiosity to Rutgers University, where she studied meteorology and began shaping it into something professional. And when she graduated, she did what the industry asks of everyone who wants to earn their place in it. She started at the bottom. Local markets, unglamorous hours. Segments that nobody outside a small regional audience ever saw. She was not the star yet. She was just someone doing the work, getting better, learning through repetition the things that cannot be taught in a classroom. She moved through markets across the country, building a foundation that would eventually hold something substantial. When she arrived at NBC and found her way onto the Today Show, it was not a stroke of luck arriving in place of effort. It was effort finally arriving at the place it had always been heading. And on that platform, something became clear very quickly. She was not simply good at the job. She had a quality that cannot be manufactured, a warmth that arrived through the screen without losing anything in translation. She could talk about a severe weather system bearing down on a coastline and make you feel both informed and safe. She could sit in the middle of a slow news morning and make the whole broadcast feel like a conversation between people who genuinely liked each other. That is not a technical skill. That is a human one, and she had it completely. Beyond the cameras, she was building something just as real and just as meaningful. She met Brian Fischera, a cameraman at NBC, a man whose work kept him on the same side of the lens as the stories being told rather than in front of them, and what developed between them was, by all evidence, the quiet and durable kind of love. They married, they started building a life together. And for a period of time, everything Dylan Dreyer had worked for seemed to be arriving all at once. The way good things sometimes do when you have been patient enough and persistent enough to let them find their timing. But life, as anyone who has lived enough of it knows, does not stay still. It does not honor the plans we make for it. And for Dylan, the shifting was only just beginning. There is a kind of happiness that does not announce itself loudly. It settles. It becomes the texture of your mornings, the ease in your voice, the particular steadiness of someone who has stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop because, for once, everything is simply good. Dylan Dreyer had arrived at that place. You could see it in her if you were paying attention, not just the professional ease of someone doing a job they are good at, but the personal ease of someone whose life, outside the studio, is also going well. Her career had grown beyond the weather segment in ways she probably could not have anticipated when she first took her place in the Today Show family. She had become something more than a meteorologist. She had become a presence, familiar, trusted, warmly and consistently herself in a way that is genuinely rare in the world of morning television, where the pressures toward performance and polish can slowly sand away the edges of a person until something smooth and impersonal is left in their place. That had not happened to Dylan. She had remained herself, and her audience felt it and stayed. At home, the life she and Brian were building continued to grow. Their son Calvin arrived in 2016, and Dylan did what she had always done with the real experiences of her life. She talked about it honestly. She did not curate motherhood into something aspirational and tidy. She talked about the exhaustion and the wonder in the same breath. About the love that rewires you completely, and the sleep deprivation that makes you feel like a different person. She was real about it because that was the only way she knew how to be. And her audience met that realness with a depth of recognition and gratitude that only deepens a bond already formed over years of shared mornings. She and Brian began hoping for a second child, and that was when something shifted. Something quiet at first, almost invisible, but carrying beneath it a weight that would take years to fully understand. The journey toward a second pregnancy was not what she had hoped it would be. It was longer, harder, more medically involved and more emotionally consuming than she had anticipated. And instead of keeping that struggle private, which she had every right to do, which most people in her position would have chosen, she brought it into the open. She talked about fertility challenges with the same undefended honesty she brought to everything else. She let people see that the woman on the screen, the one who made everything look so natural and so warm, was also sitting in medical offices and riding the particular emotional roller coaster that fertility treatment puts you on: hope and setback and waiting and hope again. On a cycle that does not respect your schedule or your mental reserves. The women who heard her speak about it knew exactly what she meant, not because they had read about it or studied it, but because they had lived it. And hearing Dylan say it out loud on a platform that millions of people watched gave something back to them. Not an answer, not a solution, but a simple, powerful acknowledgement that this experience was real and hard, and worthy of being spoken about without shame. After time and treatment, and the kind of sustained hoping that asks everything of a person, Dylan and Brian received the news they had been waiting for. She was pregnant. Their son Oliver arrived in January 2020, and the happiness that followed that birth was the particular kind that comes on the other side of difficulty, not just joy but relief. Not just celebration but the quiet, profound exhale of something resolved, except it was not fully resolved. Because Oliver, not long after he came home, began to show signs that something was not quite right. According to what Dylan shared publicly, her youngest son was navigating health challenges that required careful attention and ongoing monitoring, the kind of situation that changes the background frequency of daily life in a way that parents of children with medical needs understand deeply. She was not specific in ways that would compromise his privacy, but she was honest. She always found a way to be honest. The joy of having Oliver was real, completely real. But it was accompanied now by worry, by the constant parental vigilance of watching a child and wondering and hoping alongside everything else she was carrying. And there was more still to come. There is a particular kind of tired that does not live in the body. It lives deeper than that. It is the tiredness of sustained emotional weight, of month after month of uncertainty stacking on top of itself, each layer adding to the one beneath it, until the whole structure is something heavy and permanent and impossible to simply put down. Dylan Dreyer was carrying that kind of tired, and most of the people watching her on television every morning had no idea. In 2022, she shared something that crossed a threshold. Something that reached people in a place words do not always find. She and Brian had lost a pregnancy, a miscarriage. That word, clinically plain and emotionally enormous, represents a kind of grief that millions of women carry silently, often because there is no culturally sanctioned space to set it down. No socially recognized period of mourning for something that never fully arrived in the world. Dylan gave it space. She talked about the loss with an openness that was, by then, characteristic of her, but no less courageous for being consistent. She described what it felt like to lose a pregnancy that she and Brian had already invested hope and love and imagination into. The specific grief of mourning not just what was, but what you had already begun to picture. What you had already started quietly to look forward to. The response was overwhelming. Not in the way that celebrity news typically generates noise, clicks and takes and reactions that burn hot and disappear in a day. But in the quieter, more personal way that happens when someone speaks a truth that other people have been carrying alone. Women who had suffered their own pregnancy losses wrote to her. Some of them had never told anyone. Some of them had been holding it for years. Dylan's willingness to say it out loud gave them something rare: permission to grieve something real. She had become, without setting out to become anything in particular, a kind of witness. Someone through whose honesty other people saw their own lives more clearly. That is a meaningful thing to be. But it comes at a cost. The cost of remaining open when closing down would be easier. Of continuing to feel and continuing to share the feeling, when numbness would be a more comfortable place to live. The accumulation of it all, the fertility journey, the ongoing concern for Oliver, and now this loss, was not the kind of weight that has a defined season. It did not end. It became part of the ongoing structure of her life, something she carried alongside everything else, on camera and off, day after day after day. Morning television asks something specific and demanding of the people who do it well. It asks for consistency so complete that it becomes invisible. It asks you to arrive every single day fully present and fully warm and fully engaged, regardless of what happened the night before, regardless of what you are carrying, regardless of what is waiting for you when the broadcast ends and the cameras go dark. Most viewers never think about this. When it is done well, you are not supposed to. The whole point is that it feels effortless. Dylan Dreyer made it feel effortless. And that, to anyone who understood what her life had contained during those years, was its own extraordinary thing. She spoke honestly, in interviews and in quieter moments on air, about what it was like to hold the professional and the personal in the same body at the same time. To smile into a camera in the same hour that you were carrying grief. To be present for millions of people while also, privately, being someone who was going through something hard. She was not complaining about this. She understood the privilege of the platform, the responsibility that came with it, the genuine love she had for the work. She was simply telling the truth about what it cost. And what came through in those conversations was something worth sitting with. There is a version of getting through hard things that is really just getting away from them, numbing out, shutting down, building walls thick enough that nothing gets in or out. That is one kind of survival, and then there is the other kind where you stay open. Where you let yourself feel the grief and the joy and the worry and the love, all at the same time, because none of them are willing to wait their turn. Dylan appeared to be practicing that second kind of survival, the harder one, the one that does not protect you from anything but keeps you genuinely human. Brian was there throughout all of it. That much was clear from everything she shared, every quiet reference to the partnership that had been, through all of it, her most consistent foundation. Not a perfect partnership, no honest one ever is, but a real one. The kind where two people keep choosing each other specifically in the moments when choosing something else would require less. Even with all of that steadiness behind her, there were questions she could not answer. About how long a person can carry what she was carrying without something giving way. About what it means to give so much of yourself, publicly and privately, with such consistency for so long. About what is left at the end of a day like that, and whether it is enough to begin again the next morning. In early 2023, Dylan Dreyer shared something that landed differently than ordinary good news. She was pregnant again, expecting a third child. And the people who had followed her journey, who had sat with her through the fertility struggle and the miscarriage and the years of quiet, accumulating difficulty, received that announcement with something that felt less like excitement and more like relief. A collective, deeply personal, "This is what we were hoping for." The pregnancy progressed. Her third son, Russell, was born later that year. And when she shared the first images, the exhausted, real, unfiltered face of a woman holding a child she had waited and hoped and grieved for, there was nothing about it that felt routine. There was nothing about it that could be filed away under ordinary celebrity news. It was earned, visibly, unmistakably earned. And the people who understood the full story of how that baby had come to exist, what had been walked through to get there, felt the weight and the beauty of it accordingly. But even in that arrival, even in that genuine joy, the full picture remained complex. Oliver was still navigating his health journey. The attention and care that required did not pause for the new baby or the television schedule or anything else. Dylan was managing it all simultaneously, a newborn's needs, a middle child's medical realities, a career that started before sunrise, and an audience of millions who turned to her in part because she made hard mornings feel survivable. The layers of that life were real and dense and not simple in any direction. There is something quietly astonishing about that. About the distance between what a person's life looks like from the outside and what it actually contains. About how much a human being can hold, not comfortably, not without cost, but hold nonetheless. When love is the reason and showing up is the commitment. Dreyer at 44 carries that astonishment in every morning she walks into the studio. She is not the woman she was 10 years ago. None of us are. But the changes in most lives happen privately, in spaces where only the people closest to us ever get to see. Her changes happened on camera, in interviews. In honest, vulnerable statements shared with an audience that had come to feel, over years of shared mornings, like something close to family. She allowed that. She chose it again and again, each time the easier option would have been silence. There are people who move through public life behind glass, protected, curated, visible, but untouchable. You see them, but you never really see them. You see the image they have decided to project, carefully maintained, carefully managed, revealing nothing of what the actual life feels like from the inside. There are very good reasons to do this. Visibility is not the same as safety, and the choice to protect yourself is not weakness. But Dreyer is not that kind of public figure. She never has been. She is the other kind, the rarer kind, who seems to understand, perhaps instinctively, that the truest thing she can offer is not a performance of everything being fine, but an honest accounting of what it actually feels like to be a person. A full, complicated, sometimes struggling, genuinely loving person. She did not decide to become an advocate for fertility awareness. That happened because she chose honesty over pretending, and the honesty turned out to be exactly what thousands of women had needed someone to say. She did not set out to become a voice for pregnancy loss. That happened because she refused to treat her miscarriage as something to be hidden, and in refusing, she gave other women something they had not known they were waiting for. She did not plan for her son's health challenges to open a conversation about the particular, and often invisible weight of parenting a child with ongoing medical needs. But they did because she let them. All of it happened as the natural result of a single choice, made over and over again across the years to be real, even when real was hard. And that honesty carried a cost. Not professionally, if anything, it did the opposite professionally, deepening and cementing the connection between her and the audience that loved her. But personally, the cost of letting millions of people see you clearly during the years when you are most vulnerable is the cost of never fully having those years to yourself. Of processing your grief in a space that is also always public, of finding your way through the hard things while the watching continues. She kept showing up. That is the simplest and truest summary of what Dreyer did during the hardest chapter of her life. She kept showing up for her children, for her husband, for the show, for the audience, and for all the women who were watching, not just for the weather, but because they saw something of themselves in her and needed to know it was going to be okay. At 44, she is in the middle of her story, not at the end, not at the conclusion of whatever it is she is working through and working toward. Just in the middle, which is where life mostly takes place, not in the dramatic openings or the tidy endings, but in the long, demanding, ordinary, extraordinary stretch of days that make up a real human life. She has lived that stretch publicly, with more visibility than most of us will ever know and with more honesty than most of us would ever choose. And in doing so, she has become, for an enormous number of people, something that cannot be manufactured or marketed or designed, a genuine reminder that it is possible to go through the hardest things and remain, stubbornly and beautifully, yourself. That is not a small thing to be. In fact, it might be the most important thing there is. If this story stayed with you, if something in it reminded you of your own life or someone you love, or the quiet weight that people carry without anyone around them knowing, please take a moment and share what you are thinking in the comments. These conversations matter. They are the whole reason stories like this one are worth telling. If you want more documentaries that go past the surface and into the true human depth of the lives around us, subscribe and stay close. There is always more beneath the story than what the headlines show.